Good morning, Dan and Amy. Sexual harassment culture of in Springfield. That's the allegation by a growing number of voices, some of who've come forward to be named and to name names. Well, one in particular, her name is Denise Rotheimer. She's a victims' rights advocate who is lobbying for legislation in Springfield because her daughter was the victim of sexual abuse. Her 11-year-old daughter was a victim of sexual abuse, so she got involved to push legislation for families who've suffered similar victimization, whose kids have. And that put her in contact with State Senator Ira Silverstein.
But Ira told her that she was intoxicating.
Yeah.
And he said things like, quote, "I like having meetings with you because you're pretty to look at," while she was pushing a bill for victims in Springfield.
Well, Ms. Rotheimer had the courage to name the name and describe exactly what happened. She also had a voicemail message, which she played for the legislative committee to which she testified about this, that seemed to corroborate her story. Here's some of what she had to say.
What I dealt with Silverstein, I ended up 6 weeks in a crisis. I lost 20 pounds. My hair fell out. I was so scared that I would have to admit myself into a hospital because I went down to like 109 pounds. He would have meetings with me because he liked to look at me. He thought I was pretty. He would tell me I'm intoxicating, I'm intimidating, I look like a movie star, always pointing out how I look. He's a married man.
Mm-hmm. His wife is Chicago Alderman, 50th Ward. He stepped down from his leadership post within the Senate Democrat caucus this week, but not his seat. And now, of course, John, you have both the leadership of both parties rushing to look like they're taking something seriously that they, up until this point, had not taken seriously, clearly, because they didn't even bother, the two parties, to get together to appoint a legislative inspector general.
Wait, who runs the Senate?
Well, John Cullerton.
And he's the mini-me of who?
Well, I mean, they're all mini-me's.
He's the mini-me of one guy.
Mike Madigan?
The one on the toadstool looking at his pot of gold.
Yeah.
And Mikey has a daughter, right?
Lisa Madigan. She's the Attorney General.
What is that? Because I keep hearing her talking about, protecting women and women's, right?
No.
So what happened? Am I missing something, Dan?
Oh, no. She's gotten into the act, too, of looking
now?
serious. Yeah. She said that there should be a inspector general appointed who's an attorney with extensive experience as a prosecutor or with experience investigating allegations of sexual harassment. The General Assembly didn't fill the legislative inspector general position. So Ms. Rotheimer's complaint went to the inspector general's office in November of 2016 and wasn't acted upon because there is no legislative inspector general. State Senator Karen McConaughey, a Republican from Kane County, found out this week there are 27 other complaints against members of the General Assembly that also haven't been acted upon because the legislative leaders of both parties haven't filled the post, which sounds to me like one of those non-aggression pacts, John, where we've got bad actors, you've got bad actors. How about we just brush it all under the rug?
But wait a minute now. The Legislative Ethics Commission, I'm reading the Tribune now, okay? A group of lawmakers appointed by legislative leaders is in charge of putting the inspector general in who would look into such a thing, the legislative inspector general. That commission is headed by Terry Link, Democrat of Waukegan, or as I'd like to say, Democrat Jimmy DeLeo. How you doing? So, anybody call Terry? Hey, Terry?
So you may want to consider this, Illinois families and persons concerned about women being treated improperly, maybe men too. We've certainly seen that in Hollywood. When you watch all of the moralizing and the faux indignation emanating from the same people who have been at minimum asleep at the switch, at maximum complicit in enabling and covering up bad behavior by their caucus mates. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Denise Rotheimer. Denise, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So the legislation, I guess the best thing to do is just in brief describe the legislation you were advancing and then your interactions with Silverstein and what you tried to do about interactions that made you uncomfortable.
In late 2014, after the Crime Victim Rights Amendment was passed with the leadership of Attorney General Lisa Madigan, I immediately sought this legislative action because she prohibited crime victims from being appointed attorneys, specifically in our Illinois Constitution, which is egregious because, moms or dads whose children have been raped and murdered and don't have money, we do have a right. We've had a right since the time my daughter was raped, and we went through the courts in 2002, 2003 to hire an attorney, but at our expense. So for those who don't have the financial means, Lisa Madigan put into the Constitution that they cannot be appointed an attorney. So I'm the one who gets the calls. And I was trying to remedy this injustice by coming up with a plan or a proposal to afford crime victims with legal representation at no cost or additional cost to taxpayers by using existing funds from the Crime Victim Compensation Act, because each victim is entitled or eligible up to $27,000 to reimburse out-of-pocket expenses related to the criminal offense.
So this brought you to Ira Silverstein.
Yeah, initially I had been working with Senator Pamela Altoff. I never knew Ira before I went to Springfield in 2015 to oppose again the legislation that Lisa Madigan was pushing, the enabling legislation to that constitutional amendment. And he called me immediately saying that, he commended my effort for my work with crime victims, and he was very, disappointed to learn all the things that I had to say in opposition to that bill, which is the truth. That was horrible legislation, and he wanted to help. So I said, well, you can reach out to Pamela Altoff because she's been working with me on this, and when she files a bill, you can be a co-sponsor. The next thing I knew, he was the sponsor of the legislation, and that's what triggered that relationship.
And so
what
then,
did he do?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's right. Denise?
Yes.
So then Ira Silverstein engaged you, and what did he do? We've heard some of your testimony, but just in brief, give us a sense of your interactions with him, particularly when you, per what you've already said about what he said to you, sort of indicated that that made you uncomfortable, that was inappropriate and the like.
Well, first, I'd like to, and one of the reasons why I'm glad to be talking about this is to just provide some education. I've been reading some of the articles and some of the comments by some of the people who have opinions. And I really think it's important that people understand the nature of this abuse. It starts out insidiously. It's not just in your face, a full-on attack. Some cases it may be, but, he was very delicate in the way that he used tactics to lure me into this, what ended up resulting into an obsessive fantasy that he ultimately had. He initially Facebook messaged me. I had just started doing the Facebook messaging because my daughter, she resides in England. And so that was one form of our communication. And then it became more social. And so I was having a difficult time because I've worked on 2 other pieces of legislation, and I've, been in the legislative arena since 2003 when I first pursued that first law. I've never had that kind of contact or communication, especially one with a married man.
What was the communication like?
Well, like when he kept setting up these meetings and wanting to meet in person and said that I'm pretty to look at. It was like, well, you're married and we're actually meeting in your office, which is next door to your wife. You shouldn't be telling me that I'm pretty to look at, thinking in the back of my mind. And then when we were in his office this one day, he told me about how when Obama was a state senator, his aide actually helped Silverstein in a situation because Silverstein mentioned he got a letter from some woman who said she wanted to do all these sexual things to him. And Silverstein, was told by Obama's aide not to go. It's a trap. They're just putting a joke on you and all this and that. And I couldn't understand why was he telling me this. Here I'm trying to talk about the parents who are calling me, the stories, the significance of why we need to get this legislation, moving forward, get it, into the bill form or get it,
and so ultimately, when you push back against those comments, what happened to the legislation? What did Silverstein take punitive action because you didn't accede to his advances?
No, it was when he saw it in April of 2015 that I had a boyfriend, which I didn't realize that's what he had thought. There's a lobbyist that I came in contact with who's a friend of mine that also knows Silverstein well. And I guess, the conversation went, Silverstein told me that I should just get consolidation with my boyfriend. And I said, what do you mean, my boyfriend? I don't have a boyfriend. Oh, well, that's not what Teddy told me. And I'm like, well, I knew who he was talking about, Teddy. So I said, no, that's not my boyfriend. That's been a friend of mine for over 20 years. And so when he realized that, he was not my boyfriend, he brought my bill back to life, because what he would do is stick it in reassignment where it would just end up dying and going nowhere.
Did he ever try to put his hands on you or ask you out or do anything?
No, see, if it ever had gotten to that point, then I would have had some type of remedy through criminal action. I met with my state attorney in April also that month, because that's the month I went into that crisis. And, that's why I say he knew how to do things at a certain level, I guess, testing me out, but knowing that I was not going to reciprocate.
So he used the legislation that you were advocating for as a way to kind of keep you, beholden is too strong a word, but accessible to. And if he thought you were pulling away, then he manipulated the legislation so that it wouldn't move. And then when he thought you were back in place, so to speak, then the legislation would move. That kind of. That kind of yo-yoing with you.
And then threaten the legislation. I'm the sponsor of this bill. That kind of a thing. And so it was very, it's not something anyone should go through is really the point that I would like to make. What I was put through is not something anyone should have to ever go through. It was just like a complete and total invasion of my life. I was with friends when he would, message me on Facebook, and I would look at them and say, look at what this guy is doing. Look at how often he is contacting me. He doesn't stop. And I had a friend of mine who told me that he wanted to, be more with me. And I was like, oh, my gosh, thinking to myself, this guy, there's a possibility that he wants to, if I was willing. That just put me over the edge, because, like I said, he's a married man. And I tried to keep it, as innocent as I could, even though there really wasn't anything innocent about it. But it could have gotten worse because I was being told that he wanted more.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that the special counsel should be appointed, as some have now suggested, to investigate complaints like yours, since there has been no legislative inspector general for years, and so complaints like yours have languished unacted upon for years?
Well, when I filed this complaint, I had no idea that, number one, there was nothing in the law, the Ethics Act, that prohibited sexual harassment. When I became aware of this bill and read the bill, I thought, oh my gosh, it's 2017. You mean just now we're putting into law that sexual harassment is prohibited, shall be prohibited? And then number two, I did not know that there was no one in that position, the legislative inspector position. And now I'm finding out that because there's this time period, like a statute of limitation, that my complaint was filed at the end of November last year. So my year is going to come up at the end of this month, and if at the end of this month they don't have an legislative inspector general appointed, my complaint could just expire.
Just disappear.
I may not get my hearing. I may not be able to present all my evidence, which is really what I want done. I need people to know what all happened.
Well, I think they're starting to know now, and I think that you coming forward is probably going to lead others to do the same and change the culture down there, at least in part. So, Denise Rotheimer, victims' rights advocate, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.